Дорогие друзья, мы рады приветствовать вас на третьем форуме социальных инноваций регионов. Напоминаю, что следующая встреча пройдет на русском языке. Если в зале присутствуют иностранные гости, то вы можете воспользоваться устройствами синхронного перевода, которые мы подготовили для вас на входе в зал «Москва». А прямо здесь, сейчас, в зале «Москва», мы поговорим о счастье со знаменитым психологом и психотерапевтом Андреем Курпатовым. Внимание на экран!
Андрей Курпатов, президент Высшей школы методологии, научный руководитель лаборатории нейронаук и поведения человека Сбербанка. Каждый из нас настойчиво ищет счастье. Но что это такое? Идеальные условия существования? Любовь, деньги, самореализация? Андрей Курпатов рассмотрит этот вопрос с позиции нейрофизиологии. Причина нашего поведения оказывается вовсе не подвластна нашему пониманию. Нам лишь кажется, что мы можем объяснить, почему мы выбрали ту или иную профессию или встречаемся с тем или иным человеком. Современная нейрофизиология говорит нам об обратном. Сегодня на третьем форуме социальных инноваций регионов Андрей Курпатов с лекцией «Все, что нужно знать о счастье. Переосмысление психологии».
Президент Высшей школы методологии, научный руководитель лаборатории нейронаук и поведения человека Сбербанка Андрей Курпатов. Ваши аплодисменты! Добрый день, Андрей Владимирович. Как вы добрались до нашего зала?
Good afternoon. Did you have a chance to visit exhibitions? Well, I just came from my office and I haven't had time to visit exhibitions. We will have a round table and I'll have the possibility to look around. During the next discussion there will be Dave Buettner, Orbit de Grey. Do you know them or you will meet them for the first time? Personally, I don't know them. I know what they're doing. I think that we will add to each other. They are talking about health. Me, I'm talking about psychological factors which determine our psychological age, which is very important, and our psychiatric health. I'm not a psychologist, I'm a psychiatric doctor. The life expectancy is growing and our brain is not fit for such a long life. Well, I pass the floor to Andrei Vladimirovich Kurpatov. It will be a very interesting presentation. Thank you. Thank you for coming. I'll talk about a rather strange topic. They usually cut me on that. More than 20 years ago, I wrote a book, I'm happy according to my wish. It was sold 1 million copies, everybody likes it, everything is fine. There is just one problem. 20 years later I wrote another book, Red Pill, where I said that there is no such a thing as happiness. And those millions of readers who wrote this, they didn't understood this. They asked me, you talked about one thing, now you talk about quite another thing. I'd like to explain the meaning of the title. You can be happy only if you want it and if you do your best to achieve it. In my book, Happy According to My Will, I'm describing psychological tools which help you to feel better psychologically. But if you would like to have more serious feelings, then you'll have to work with your psychic conditions. And today I'll tell you about our brain, how our brain actually forms our life. And when you know the mechanisms of your brain, then you will know what shall be done to change your life. What do we know about our brain? I publish a book for kids about our brain, and parents actually love it. We think that this is one of the organs like a kidney, and we have brain. But the truth is that we are just an addition to our brain, and it's not the same. Our brain has us, and we are just a product, a small product of a rather complicated activity of our brain. And here I'd like to tell you about super capacities of our brain. There are those who tell us that we have not a brain but something unusual. The brain, which is the we use our brain to listen to each other. So it's not very large. It's like a large napkin, and the number of neurons which are responsible for this activity is just 18-20 billions in the cerebral cortex, and in our brain we have 87 billion, but in the cerebral cortex just 20. The question is where we have the majority of neurons. So, in order to understand, it, we should understand what cerebellum means, or little brain means, tentorium. The tentorium is responsible for your movement. So, and you need half of your cells, neurocells in your body to do this. What can do the cerebrum? Brain is not a fantastic thing. It's rather complicated. We are stupid, but it's not. That's why. But not nothing fantastic. Conscious. Everybody tries to find consciousness in your brain, and we think that it's something powerful. It should be in the cerebral cortex or above it. Mr. Penfield, Dr. Penfield, a neurosurgeon, actually said that our consciousness and the switch is in the in our brain axis. And actually in the 19th century the research showed that this is brain axis. It exists in the brain of any animal. So don't forget about these figures. We believe that we can solve many tasks. At least those who drive cars, they can drive and talk by talk or by phone at the same time. But you solve just one task. You wrote your phone. You wrote your phone. It has been proven that we can solve only one task per unit of time, per 1 unit of time. We can maintain in our attention only 3 elements connected with the task. If you would like to solve something, you will have only 3 elements in your consciousness. Remember how you multiply 32 by 48. So it's rather complicated combination, which consists of four digits, and our idea lasts only 3 seconds. when we write something, we put a full stop after a sentence. And if a sentence is very long, then you return to the beginning in order to understand what we are talking about, because our thought lasts 3 seconds. Now you see a well-known experiment. Mr. Neisser described it. In order to understand the limitations of what you are dealing with. So we show video which portrays two teams of players in blue and in white and in black, and you should count how many times ball will pass from one to another player. You see video, you see the players, how they pass ball to each other. When the video is over, and the question is how many times? You said 150. But didn't you see something strange over there? And half of you haven't noticed a monkey which appeared and saluted you with your hands. You can pay attention to only 3 elements. And when you trace how players pass ball to each other, you cannot discover this strange object. So there is limitations in our brain, and our consciousness does not help us to take decisions. Well, I'm rather delicate about that. Well, our consciousness does not help us to take any kind of decisions. For the first time, this question was asked rather long ago, and when Nyssen became to study our attention, Benjamin Libet conducted his experiment. I hope that you've heard about it. So the task was rather simple. The person who was tested, and they were females, she had to take decision when she pressed a button. And using equipment, Libet actually traced when her brain became active, and it became active half a second before a lady understood that she had to press a button. She knew what she wanted before she realized this. It was rather strange, but modern experiments show that it's a rather serious thing. The Institute of Max Planck in Leipzig conducted this research using functional tomography. It's a much more delicate method of diagnostics. So it was detected that 8 seconds before a human being takes a conscious decision, we can say that he or she takes this decision consciously. But before that, his brain actually does it. What happens in your life is a result of unconscious processes. And Alexei Ukhtomsky talked about this in his theory of the principle of dominating principle. We have a lot of neural cells which talk to each other, and and which neurocenter wins, whether you leave this place or not, it depends on your inner play. And you does not participate in this consciously. You just understand, you just realize that you stay or you live.
Очень драматическим последствиям. Вот давайте сейчас чуть-чуть зафиксируемся. У нас с вами что? Очень ограниченные расчетные мощности мозга, которые мы можем использовать в рамках своей сознательной деятельности. Второе. Наше сознание очень ограничено. Одна задача, всего 3 аспекта ситуации. Продолжительность мысли 3 секунды. Да? Мы, правда, этого не замечаем, но мы столь многого не замечаем, что даже неловко про это говорить. Значит, и плюс к этому наши решения – это не наши решения, не
Additionally, our decisions are not conscious decisions, but decisions of our brain. The scientific world faced dramatic things like research in social psychology, later called the psychology of situations. What is it? We are placed in unacceptable living conditions, change environment, and it turns out that we behave in a different way than we thought we would. Let us start with the famous experience of Stanley Milgram, performed in Yale University. This is Milgram himself, and he's standing on a box. This box hits you with current, and the current level goes up 15 volts. So a student comes over, he sits down at the desk, and then the teacher hits him with current for mistakes. And the experimenter will be sitting next to them, keeping an eye on the teacher, not to put mercy on the student. If the student makes a mistake, the power of current goes up 15%. Of course, as you understand, we don't do that on humans. So the student is not a real human. So a student under test is the teacher himself, who is supposed to raise the level of the current. So there is an actor behind the glass, crying and yelling, asking to let him out, that he doesn't want to take part in this experiment. When Milgram asked professional psychiatrists what they thought, how many people would reach the last phase of the experiment with XXX, the deathly charge of current, psychiatrists said at least 2% of clinical sadists. And here are the practical results. Only 12% stopped at 300 volts. 270 people cried out of pain. 315 cried in despair that they don't want to respond. And 65% of people reach the end of the experiment when the students stop showing signs of life. This may sound impossible, that 65% are ready to kill a person only because an experimenter sits next to them saying that the student agreed to an experiment. This is a scientific experiment and you agreed to it too, so keep pressing the button. So we cannot imagine this with our brain, and as we cannot imagine that our brain resolves everything without our conscious, or that we may not see a gorilla on a picture. This is the truth we need to realize and admit. So the next story is similar, about the psychology of situations. I want you to see how subtle the nuances are. This is a famous story, an experiment held at Princeton University by young priests. Young priests were told that in a building next to them, on a different end of the campus, there were people, and they were waiting for a story about a child cemeterian. If you remember, the essence of the story is no matter what origin you are, what people you belong to, it's important that you are ready to help to the person next to you. And if so, you will enter heaven, the paradise. Our young priest goes across the campus to preach. On the way, he meets a person who has a seizure, an epileptic seizure. 63% of priests stopped to help that person. The others, who were going to preach about a kind Samaritan, they took no notice of the person in a seizure. They thought, well, I'm not a doctor, maybe somebody else will see that person and help him. About the nuances, some of the tested people gathered in that building waiting for the preacher, they were really waiting, and the people knew they were late. And out of the priests being late, only 10% of the priests stopped to help the person in seizure. So the number of priests who were ready to stop and help another person went down twice, because they knew you were in a hurry. So what do you need to know about yourself? What truth do you need to know? And this is the truth you need to know. Another experiment by Philip Zimbardo. Well, people say it was fake. It wasn't fake. The experiment was performed. Accidentally, the experimenters became the actors, the subjects of the experiment. So people were put in a basement of a psychological department of Stanford University, and they played prison there. They turned into prisoners. The others turned into the guards. And it turned out into a concentration camp in a few days, although it was a game. But we begin living by our roles very quickly. Why is it not a mistake? Why is it what happened? Zimbardo worked in a famous prison, Abu Ghraib prison, and here are the two pictures, very famous ones. There are hundreds of them, but they are classified by the U.S. law, because the United States doesn't want to show what the guards did in the prison. So they did it because they wanted to, because they were able to do it, because such was a tradition in those prisons. They are good people. They have wives, mothers, fathers, and children. So those soldiers will come back to their families, to normal life. But when they were put in those pathological conditions, regardless of their principles and values and ability to think, they start acting inhuman. This is a law defined by Lee Ross, and he was a famous article, most widely cited in psychology, called The Fundamental Mistake of Attribution. We attribute a number of characteristics to a given person. We say he has strong willpower, he's kind, clever, etc. But in reality, when he finds himself in different situations, he demonstrates a different behavior. And this is what we need to understand, not about other people who may lay us down, cheat on us, but about ourselves. So this is what I want to deliver to you. For us to stop having illusions, thinking that our conscious is capable of making us happy, of making us people who reach goals, who reach certain heights. Well, our principles are not very stable. How many times have you said to yourself, I will live a new life tomorrow, I will lead a healthy lifestyle, I will be on a diet, I will go to a gym, etc., etc. I will not get irritated with my kid, I will not be rude to my mom. How many times have you had such moments of truth? And the question is, how long did it last? It's good if you could remember about your plan on the next morning. I want you to realize that those beautiful principles are useless. You cannot really rely on them. Let's have a look at the structural organization of our brain. So there are three layers. The first layer is responsible for neural and psychical tension, and we all differ by the level of the psychic energy. Some people are super active, hyperactive. Some people are quiet, apathic, with lower energy, more quiet. This is not defined by laziness. Laziness is one of the factors, but by the number of certain cells located in the back section of our brain. I talked about the brain and its limitations already, but there is the medium layer between the upper and the lower parts. It has as many neurons as in the rest of the brain. So those structures define the nature of our desires. So what desires do we have? Well, those desires were given to us by evolution. Number one is self-rescue. So every individual should take care of being safe. So we are individuals, but apart from being an individuals, we are part of a social group. Well, like animals, some animals are lonely animals, some animals live in packs. We are individuals that live in a group, and we will not be able to survive alone. So our instinct is to maintain relationships with the rest of the social group. Otherwise, you wouldn't tolerate other people around you, but you somehow tolerate them, and sometimes you even need them. And you say, oh, I hate loneliness, I want to find a soulmate. This is the hierarchical instinct that speaks in you. And thirdly, for a species to survive, it must multiply. So the third basic need is the sexual need. So these are the three basic instincts that we live by. So these are the brain structures where our desires are hidden. Let's discuss the instinct of self-saving. On the one hand, we're afraid of things, we hide, we protect ourselves. On the other hand, we're curious. If you are not curious, you will die. You need to understand what is going on around you. And once we talk about this instinct of self-rescue, it's not only about fear and protection. It's also about curiosity. And if something is wrong with a person's brain, their instinct of self-rescue is distorted, and their curiosity goes beyond the limits, so they are not afraid of reaching the highest mounts. They don't care whether they fall down or not. Some people are over careful and they don't want to try things. The second instinct, and this is the manifestation of this instinct, it's not a new picture. I guess we're all grown-ups here. So this is the sexual instinct. And I have a question to you. Those animals, are they thinking about continuing, about multiplying? Do they think about nice puppies that they're going to have? Hardly so. Because in reality, our sexual life is not related to multiplication. It's only an instinct without conscious understanding of the goal. So in our life, we have seen transformation, pronounced transformation of this instinct. Sexual instinct is a desire to impress another individual. If you know how peacocks interact, a male and a female, several male peacocks open up their tails and demonstrate themselves. And a gray male female peacock is looking at the male's tail, and the male peacock that impresses her most, she will approach that male, and they will form a couple. So we know we have a need to protect ourselves, to be safe. Our second need is curiosity. You were curious, so that's why you came here. And number 3, we want to impress other people, and we want to be impressed. What is love? My precious, if you remember. This famous movie where Golem is getting crazy about the ring. When we lose this inner capability to resist desire, so we want to impress, we want to be impressed. Art exists because we want to be inspired and impressed, and it exists because artists want to impress us. And the second social instinct is made of 2 parts. On the one hand, it is a desire to be the king of the mountain. You remember the crisis of 3-year-olds when young kids want to be everything their own way. Therefore, so not the truth is important, but who was right. So that's why power can be symbolic. And secondly, we have a desire to rule, and at the same time we want to subordinate to somebody who will take responsibility for our existence, for somebody who will define what we should do and where we should go. So these 2 things live together in us. So why do we have those mirror neurons? In the early 1990s, Giacomo Rizzolatti, professor of Parma University, who studied brain in monkeys, in his experiments, he installed electrodes in the brains of monkeys. Those electrodes sent signals, and a monkey performed certain movements. Those electrodes also fixed the movement of a monkey, or tracked the movements of the monkey. But there was a funny thing happened. One of the workers dropped a handful of nuts and started collecting them. And a monkey with an electrode in its brain, it looked at the worker who dropped the nuts. Well, the monkey's electrodes started discharging, and so the electrodes responsible for the movement of her arms started discharging. So Rizzolatti tested this again and again, and he found out those, or discovered those mirror neurons. What is the goal of those neurons? It is when you look at another person, you can feel his or her movements. And if you feel the other person's movements, you start understanding what he or she is doing. So if I try to reach for some food, you understand that I'm reaching for some food and not just reaching for something else. If I smile, the muscles that are responsible for a smile, they strain too. So we have the social detectors given to us by nature. We're social not because of something else, but it's because we have appropriate neurons responsible for this activity. So in our head, our other people live, whom we reconstructed in the course of our social life. In your heads, there are about 150 people. So our brain is as big because we need server room to fit about 150 people. This is the number that is naturally retained in your brain, and this is the number, the size of a tribe. So humans create the biggest social groups. Therefore, our brain can fit 150 people. So this picture shows the famous Dunbar layers. So 15 people is your close circle. Well, the closest circle is 5, but a close circle is 15. 50 is friends. 150 is those who you remember from time to time. 500 people, you remember where you met. And another 1,500, you remember their names or what they look like. So basically they include all scientists or actors whom you know. So if you change the life circle, some people leave your brain. There was a time at school, for instance, or in college, or on your first job, you had a group of people and you remembered everyone, you knew everything about them, you spent time with them, you valued their attention and you established good relationships with them. Today, when you meet them, you'll probably take time to remember who they are and what their names are and whether you met at all. Because our brain is not capable of retaining so many people. So moving from one area to another, you rid of images of people whom you used to deal with in the past. So the number of people in your brain is limited. So we have covered the second part. Now we know that we have actual needs. Our actual need is for safety, curiosity, desire to impress and to be impressed, to control and to subordinate. So these are the tools we create our life with. And now imagine that a myth of happiness comes true. Have you heard about happiness? In commercials, for instance, saying if you get this, you'll be happy. Or in some fairy tales. And then they lived long and happily and died on one day. Maybe they were poisoned. That's why they died on one day. So we have a feeling that this happiness awaits us somewhere. So let us imagine that, all right, why are we not happy? Because our needs are not satisfied. Imagine all our needs are satisfied and we are happy. Well, this type of an experiment was performed not with humans, but with rats. And it is called the mouse paradise, performed by John Kaufman. So he made big boxes, big containers, 2 by 2 meters, 1.5 meters tall, and he made nests for animals in them. And the number of animals was supposed to be about 4,000 comfortably fit in those containers. They had enough food, the containers were clean. So the environment in those containers was perfect. And here was the experiment. This is the first phase of the experiment. He put the first 2 couples of mice in the box, and they begin to multiply exponentially. So they get to 8, 16, etc., etc. So the population grows, and after the exponential growth, they reach the plateau phase when the number of animals in that container that can theoretically fit 4,000 mice or animals. So when the number reaches 620, they start building very rigid social hierarchy. These animals, they had everything. They had nothing to share or to fight for, but they still began to get into groups. Older males, stronger males, starting to outer the younger males. Rats like quietness. So in the end, there were rats who were not included in any groups. So the older males lived in groups and didn't allow younger males to live normally. So that meant aggression, blood, and females were stressed and they refused to mate. So the maximum amount of animals was 2,200. Then it followed by phase D. The average life expectancy in the container was 776 days, 200 days more than the upper border of the reproductive age. Indeed, rats were doing fine there, but there was one issue. Because of the level of the stress, two groups emerged. Females starting to live in upper nests, and if they were pregnant, they later ate their puppies. So the rats who were not part of the group, the male rats, the scientists called them beautiful, handsome. What they did, they took care of themselves, trying to make themselves beautiful and tidy. So the experiment lasted for 1,700 days. So the end of the experiment was when the last rat or mice died out of old age. So basically, now there were mice who had everything for a good living, but they couldn't. But they just started getting into groups. Females refused to mate. So in a container where mice had everything, food and drink and cleanliness, they died out anyway. So they extinguished themselves, and there is an explanation for it. So the essence of this experiment is not that we are like rats. The point of the experiment is that if we do not have normal or natural living conditions, or if living conditions change, something will certainly go wrong. Calhoun was given an audience with the Pope. So what do we need to understand here? We were not created for ideal conditions and not created for happiness. So if all your dreams start coming true and happiness start coming to your houses, so wait for troubles, because your mindset is not ready for it. Your psyche is not ready for it. So what went wrong now? These are the data of Eric Sigman of 2015, if I'm not mistaken. By that time, 7-year-old kids had spent 1 year of their life in front of the displays. 4 years of life, young people of around 18 years had spent 4 years in front of a display. This was in 2015, and these are the data of 2015 as well.
This is the data of the Ministry of Communications of Great Britain. Here we can see that adult citizens of Great Britain spends 11 hours looking at the screen. From 16 to 24, 14 hours using several screens. So we end up in a rather strange construction, a constant information consumption. This is Russian data. This is Kaspersky laboratory. 40% of kids up to 10 years old practically constantly are online. Half of our kids are educated by gadgets. 68% of teenagers from 14 to 18 are constantly online. We have a very important need. Social communication. We need other people. And this way we are building our inner world. But who come into and are in and out of your head when you are constantly inside the screen in online? They cannot use the resources of your brain, and we end up with a phenomena. And last year it was defined as a dependency. It's a digital dependency. 15 to 35% of world population is digitally dependent. It's not that you are just live without your telephone. No, it's up to 35% of your neuron connections in your brain became lower, and you don't use your brain. It just seems to us that when we use gadgets, or when we watch, or when we follow social networks, or watch news or video content, we became smarter. No, the facts show otherwise. We consume digits, and we don't use the area of our world, which is of our brain, which is responsible for thinking, and the cells of our brain are not used. And if you don't use your cells, they are dying. If you ask a teenager, what do you need for your happiness, he will say, well, I should be warm, something to eat, and Wi-Fi. The full phone is just a part and parcel of this. It seems like they have phones since they start, from the moment they are born. When you wake up in the morning, what you do first and foremost? Instagram and Facebook. You check your phone, and when you stop checking your phone, when you go to bed, when you put it next to you. So your life starts when you meet your phone, and ends when you say goodbye to your phone. You switch off your consciousness and you fall asleep. When you wake up and you meet your phone again, those are new environment of your living, and the normal conditions are changing, and something goes wrong, and people becomes they are no longer that smart, because we should use your brain, and we don't use it, and it works with less capacity. This is just medicine. This is a simulation of iPhone. When you have a pulse, when you when you have a pause, you take out your phone and start to use it. This is European mode, Austrian. Chinese, starting from 2008, in China, they organized camps where they sent people digitally dependent, those who play computer games, and they live there. They sent there forcefully, and they are cured there from their digital dependence. But there are a lot of opportunities when you use internet or social networks. Well, I'm not against it. Many of you came here because you've read on Instagram about my presentation. That's why by itself it's okay. But the problem is that when you have this digital dependency, you need to consume more and more of new information, and it's a vicious circle. You consume information, and your cognitive burden is growing. If you read constantly something, if you recognize just images without any constructive activity, you get tired anyway. And because of that, you cannot easily solve complicated tasks. And brain, it's a very energy consuming tool. 2% of your body consumes 80% of the energy of your body. If you select between cognitive tasks, between simple and complicated tasks, you select a simple task. And then you face a dramatic situation when you face escalation of primitive content. And our attention is in the center of fight for it. Mass media, social, political forces, they want to use our attention. This is reasonable, but in order to do this, their content should be simpler comparing to what other have, and they compete with each other. I mean, who creates a more primitive content, a simpler content? Professional content or university content, it's very good, because talented persons worked on that to create a simple content capable of attract attention of million and million of people, subscribers. You should be a talented person to do that. Again, we end up in a vicious circle. We cannot live without telephone, but inside telephone we will not select smart or scientific articles or texts. No, we will use a more primitive content. This is a famous. I write a lot about this in my books, how our brain is working. It depends on what you are doing, and different parts of your brain this job activates, or this work activates. Upper brain is thinking. That's how many zones of your brain is active when you solve complicated intellectual task. And lower scheme shows what happens with your brain when you consume information. In order to think, you have to have a certain emotional state or condition. You cannot do this when you are distracted. For example, you are thinking about a rather serious task, and I constantly distract you. What will you do? You will be irritated because you cannot concentrate your attention to the task before you. So scientists calculated how much time it lasts. We need 23 minutes in order to concentrate your attention. But during this time, you will be able to check your telephone 20 times. And as a result, the brain resources which should be used by you when you solve serious tasks which could make your life better. Success in your job, communication with other people. Instead of doing this, we just use brain chewing gum. You are thinking about the same ideas. You are in a vicious circle. Roughly we have 25 topics or themes. You will see that there are 25 complex situations which you are analyzing in your
для улучшения собственной жизни.
brain, and you do not use these resources to improve your life. Everything becomes worse for us. And modern conditions is a red paradise described by Calhoun, and our modern world, which is intended to serve us, cannot make us happy. And if we really decide to see happiness not as illusion, not as a fairy tale that soon or in the future we will be happy. No, we should understand that it's a challenge. It's a challenge. Not long ago, we were happy quite often. A person came back alive from war, and everybody is crying because they are happy. A person is cute after appendices, and he survived, and this is happiness. A new toy, happiness. Happiness is satisfaction of our basic needs. If your needs are satisfied, what you do in Instagram, you do not feel happy. You don't have this endorphin or dopamine working when your needs are satisfied. And now we have to create by ourselves this deficit, because our world is too good. Our life is which shall make us happy, but it makes us unhappy. That's what you should think about. No doubt you should fight with your inner demons. The level of depression in the past, 20 years ago, I wrote that it was not my forecast, it was the forecast of WHO, and WHO said that by 2020 the death because of suicide will be much more frequent phenomenon than death because of cancer. And we are coming to this. The only limitation is smartphone, but because the majority of people who feel depression, they just now use Instagram, and the level of depression is quite high. You cannot change this if you don't take medicine or go to doctor. So first you should start to deal with your psychic well-being. It suffers more and more now. Second, fight digital dependency. To limit consumption of digital products. There is nothing in your phone in the morning which you should know about before you leave your home. There is nothing in your phone which you should know before you go to bed. Because if you know that, you won't be able to do anything with that. It's time for you to fall asleep. If you start thinking that every time when you pick up phone, you do it with a purpose, you will understand that you don't have objectives. it's just automatic thing. So fighting digital dependency is our internal need, and we need to have a purpose. We need to have an objective, an aim. We should feel the hunger of our needs, of our security, of our admiration, of social interaction. And if we don't find our purpose, why shall we work? Well, you can get Wi-Fi free of charge, so we don't have motivation presently to do something big. And we shall understand that if we don't invent them ourselves, if we don't organize activities for us which will use our psychic energy, it will eat us up from inside. It will again lead us to digital consumption, and we will be intellectually poorer. And now one of the most famous psychological experiment which is still going on, and it started in 1938. It's a famous Harvard research of 724 persons were tested. Half of them were students of this university. Others were from poor districts of Boston. And researchers started to test them during entire their life. They met them and asked them what is going on in their life. Now the majority of them died, and the most famous participant of this research, they were anonymous. They don't say that it was John Kennedy. They say there was just one president who was killed later. It's a famous research, and during this time, people actually conduct normal life. Someone became president, someone lost their house, their family, someone had cancer, and psychologists actually monitored this. And when one of the leaders of this experiment was asked, what you found out, what is the most important thing that you found out? He said, the only which matters, it's the relations with others. Well, it took us many years to study human life and it took a lot of psychologists to understand this simple truth. If you are important to someone, you will not ask what is the meaning of your life. If someone needs you, if you need someone. But when you don't need anybody, and when nobody needs you, when you start to think about the meaning of life, because the meaning of life has to do with other persons. That's the most important thing which we should understand about ourselves, our brain, and our life. Thank you for this meeting.
Я чувствую неловкость. Давайте мы...
Well, we have microphones here. Here we have 15 minutes for Q&A session. First, let's ask questions and then I sign this. Good afternoon, Andrei. Good evening, Andrei. I am Paulina. You look great. Thank you. The main question online training. Online training, is it efficient comparing to normal education? It's a good question. There is no a single concept about that, because a terrible thing happened, because people stopped studying offline. First, they saw that offline is more efficient, but people stopped studying offline. We do not control their attention, we do not control their work, and offline education has its certain benefits. But smart online education, when camera actually monitors you and shows that you actually follow the presentation which is demonstrated. In China they use neuro equipment in order to control that you are following the education process. Now the online training becomes more and more analyzed technology, which helps us to be part of the educational process. But me personally, I believe that it's very important to have social communication. Thanks God, you can do this online. And teachers. It's very important to have teachers which we admire. Well, this is our nature. We are learning from persons whom we admire. If we don't admire a person, never mind how smart he or she is, our brain will not use this. And online training shows that there are a lot of programs which are offered by great professors. It's a huge talent to be a teacher. Well, we don't have a feedback, that's true. Because thousands and thousands of students follow this presentation, and the teacher cannot talk with each of them. But if you have this effect, the respect to your teacher, this makes the training process better. I am against this, but I think that soon it will be the only possible option. Good evening, Andrei Vladimirovich. I'd like to thank you for your lectures and on YouTube, for your books. You talk a lot about information consumption. People understand this, but they do not limit themselves. And you say that this could be developed when you are a kid. You can talk a lot, you can describe a lot this negative effect to people, but it's not that easy for them to limit their information consumption. I work with kids, and whether you want it or not, it affects the people's social interaction. And now kids cannot concentrate their attention. It's very difficult to explain them certain ideas. Their communication is rather primitive. It's not that easy to organize interaction with them. What shall be done for people to understand how dangerous it is? We understand. We start to understand danger when something happens. That's why I believe we shall wait for unpleasant consequences, such as Breivik accident, when they become more and more, when become more and more of them, when society starts to think why it happens. I don't think that just talking to people you will be able to change their attitude. I do my best, but don't shoot at the pianist. It plays as good as he can. Only catastrophe can change the situation. Now, if you became digitally dependent in your adult life, there is still hope. You can again go back to your normal state and you will function normally again. The problem is with kids. I have a book, Happy Child, and it dedicated to this. Why we have problems with kids? Because when we are born, our brain is 10 times less smaller when we are kids than we are adult. But neurocells in kids' brain we have much more than in the brain of an adult person. Why? Because when we become older, all this additional volume has to do with the neural connection between the cells, the white stuff of our brain. That's why it's important for kids' brain to be formed in natural conditions, in social communication and physical reality. When I understand from my experience what shall I do. So it's very important for a kid to have a minimum amount of digital consumption. If it has more, then kids won't be able to form these neurons responsible for this functionality. And we see this presently. A digital dimension, digital dimension. This is a pathological development of a brain which has no outside irritation, had no outside irritation during its formation, which was replaced by gadgets. So adult persons theoretically could change their mind, and such adults will protect kids from this. In Guardian 3 years ago, I wrote about this in the book Fourth World War. There was a journalist research. He visited famous persons in the Silicon Valley who invented fantastic things like likes, scrolling, etc. Huge inventions. And he actually asked them about how they regulate a digital consumption of kids. And I must say that how they do this is a good example for all parents. They do not allow gadgets in a child's room. In the kitchen, in bathroom, for example. Just half of people are doing this in the bathroom. And people who create this product, they understand that they actually used the most subtle instruments in our brain. When you get a message, the red light is blinking. Why? Because you have red light. You became active and became searching. So they thought through everything. And so those who created this, they protect their own kids. The Guardian asked, probably we shall start protect our kids as well. So we can change our mind, but dependency is a very tricky thing. You listen to me, you say, yeah, well, that's true, and starting from tomorrow I shall do exactly like you are saying. But do you remember what I told you about your tomorrow and how our brain functions?
It is not as simple, and it takes a huge effort to achieve it. There you go. When you spoke about addiction to a digit, ask any young person, and he or she will say about what he needs in life: Wi-Fi, a warm place to be, and food. Was it a question or a comment? Yes, it was a question. Will you repeat it first? You know, I'm an old man, so I just didn't get it. So you said, ask any young person what he or she needs, and he or she would respond that he needs a warm place, Wi-Fi, and food. And what is the question? And what else do you need? Well, he's holding my book, by the way, this young gentleman. It was all plotted. Well, we have this uneasy situation. What is your name? Kirill. And why are you holding my book in your hands? Yeah, my dad asked me to come to you and ask for an autograph. I will certainly do this. Please bring Kirill closer to the stage. We don't want to lose him. I guess I will need a pen. What's your father's name? Alexei? And mom? Elena? Oh, Violetta. So I'm writing to Alexei, Violetta, and Kirill. Be happy. So do we still have time? Very well. Well, thank you for your lecture. It was very interesting. My name is Ekaterina. Here is my question. If all our decisions are taken by our brain unconsciously and randomly, and our will does not have a role here, how can we live? How can we take conscious decisions? Is it possible to take conscious decisions, and how to do it? It's a good but very complex question. Indeed, I do have a lot of lectures on the YouTube, and I'm talking about that. And these are counterintuitive things. The counterintuitive is something that you cannot imagine, but there are so many things that we cannot imagine. We cannot imagine quantum dualism, quantum wave dualism, or how two nuclides can make life together. So if you can imagine this, I will admire you. Well, I can't imagine how two nucleotides can create life. The same thing with our conscious. We always feel that we're captured by our conscious, and we don't see all the operation of our brain. Although we can learn to keep track of it and even to control it, and I write about it in the book, in my book, The Word of Consciousness. In the end, our brain will take the final decision. What's important is what people you interact with, because other people implant certain things in your brain from what they have in their brain. So when you turn out in social groups where complex things are discussed, where scientific subjects are addressed, or some values, some significant, meaningful things with high level of competence and professionalism, your neural cells will start digesting it, absorbing it. And next time your brain needs to take a decision, it will take a decision with account for this knowledge. Therefore, what other people can give us is to share good ideas, deep knowledge to our knowledge, and it becomes our capital, our asset. And as needed, we will make use of those assets. And this should make our life better in the end. So what you've heard here today, your decision to come here was a conscious decision. Let's assume this. Do we have random visitors? I don't think so. Very few. I'm sure somebody told you to come here. Someone pushed you to come here. And somebody else told them. Sometimes YouTube gave you a recommendation, Kurbatov's lecture. Well, one person watched it and then decided to share it and recommend it. So the environment we are in may be more or less productive. It may be contagious or less contagious, less productive, and it will give you more or less knowledge depending on the quality of the environment. So be aware of the circle around you, be aware of the environment around you. Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Tatiana. Honestly speaking, I take a lot of effort now to recover from depression. But the question is how to ease this transition. Because in my head, there are several different theories, and they are deteriorating to my life. Well, please take a deep breath. One more. With your mouth. Just breathe with your mouth. Well, please don't cry. We won't cry. So we are not psychiatrists here. This is not the main part of my activity. But the goal is to find a good expert, a psychiatrist, well, I cannot diagnose you. Well, I can't really see you well from here. But if you have depression, if you are in a condition that requires treatment, you may need some medications. Current antidepressants are safe. They do not have severe side effects, and sometimes people do need it. You may take a great effort to try help yourself to recover from depression. But if you have disturbance of biochemical processes in your brain responsible for your emotional state, without medications you will not be able to overcome it. So my recommendation to you is to find an expert, a clinicist, a psychiatrist, who would prescribe a certain therapy to you. But my question is, so in my head there are two theories. So depression was because I had a lot of spare time and I started going deep in myself. So therefore, well, you can operate on all kinds of theories. There are scientists who performed thousands of experiments, so your theories do not matter. Let's have a look of what science have contributed to it. Loneliness itself is not an indication for depression, is not a prerequisite of depression. Whether you have depression or not, I can't say. You can't say this either. Only an expert can determine it. So we have a lot of people here, so we cannot have a doctor appointment here. So you can find all kinds of explanations, but in reality, there are scientific concepts describing depression, describing its mechanisms, and prescribing certain treatment. Thank you. Andrei, thank you so much for your lecture. This experiment with rats became a discovery for me. I'm close to the issues of demography, but I have never heard of this experiment, and explains the situation with demographics very well. Well, partially so. Here is another thought, maybe scary. Let's see what the other people say. This wonderful forum we're at for the second day in a row shapes a safe and comfortable future. Don't you think? So together we try to create conditions that will make us go dire straits. Maybe I wrongly interpret this situation. And I think the government stimulates this. Well, this is normal that technologically wise and socially wise that we can influence. They are supposed to improve lives of people. I don't want, I'm not looking for a war. I'm not saying let's cut a person's leg and see what happens to him. I'm not saying we should worsen the situation to make ourselves happier. I'm saying there are two different processes. Number one is what we do with our life as part of the technological and social decisions that we take. And secondly is what we know about ourselves and what can we do about it. Well, you cannot help rats. Rats cannot resolve their drama, existential drama. If we try hard, we can understand this counterintuitive thing that all improvements may lead to negative impacts in a different field. So my goal is to draw your attention to this hidden part of the problem. Apart from the income, medical technologies, etc., etc., there is a hidden part. I'm trying to say that we are approaching an iceberg, but if we are smart enough, we may turn around or we take a different approach to it. I believe that human resources are sufficient to understand this. So we have children, and our children, I guess we need to create good conditions, and we get children with good conditions. So there is no disaster. It's not a disaster. A disaster is when we stop understanding that it is necessary to create those conditions. We do not yet admit that the situation exists, but soon we'll shortly understand it. Well, the digitalization technologies introduced in schools, they are detrimental to human brain. Well, I have an idea of how digitalization takes place. On the one hand, a digital platform that can perform education is an important thing. I understand that we should move along those lines because we are in a new historical, informational, and other area. If in the past I would go to a library, order a book, and get it, today, while I walk to the library, so many new books, articles, and publications appear. So I risk of losing this game in terms of pace and time. So therefore, the availability of digital resources is necessary. Another thing is that digital resources become a means of killing time. With your phones, you kill time. Well, the subjective feeling of time is when you spend an hour in social networks, your feeling is that you have spent only 30 minutes there. So we use digital resources to kill time. If we use those resources to help our brains and not to kill our brain, then it shouldn't be a problem. If it becomes an addiction, dependence, like alcohol and drugs, alcohol, drugs, gadgets, then it is a disaster. Thank you. So next forum, hopefully, you'll be given the floor on day 1 on the plenary session in the presence of ministers and other government officials. We have 3 minutes remaining. A lot of people are waiting to ask their question. Let us listen to them. Andrei, thank you. My name is Sergei Garkovich. I'm also a psychiatrist, psychotherapist. Well, I want to thank you for what you are doing, because it is more than a mindset of a therapist, psychotherapist. This is the next step of evolution. I was very much touched by the subject you spoke about. So I think I will have to share my point of view, and then I would like to get feedback on them, if possible. So, firstly, my concern is that the term happiness is widely used, but without understanding and explaining what we mean by it. Happiness is unique to everyone. For me, happiness is hard to define, but it's a state in a human through a dynamic balance. So happiness is a balance, in the first place, between satisfying your needs. Basically, it's a balance between survival and self-rescue. Well, some people call it the process of development. Let us put a period here, because if you share all your considerations, we won't have enough time. Yes, thank you. So basically, when you speak about happiness, what do you mean by it? What do you understand by it? Well, I don't really use this concept, happiness. But when a psychotherapist is asked to lecture, what do you think people want him to speak? They want him to speak about happiness. Of course, I spoke about brain in my lecture. And I believe that if we talk about the right use of the brains from this psychotherapy point of view, being able to cope psychological problems, so we do face them. This is happiness in itself. And secondly, I mentioned the philosophical aspect of happiness. In the past, we could hope that somebody, environment, some external factors would build a system in which people will build their lives. Today, because the world has lost its access, and from the vertical structure, we have gone to a horizontal structure where there are clusters where people, or enclaves, where people do not receive any guidance or support. And so responsibility, personal responsibility for happiness has become higher. In the past, the Tsar, the king, the government, God was responsible for our happiness. The Communist Party, whoever, was responsible for our happiness. If you can't, we'll make you do it, etc. You remember those slogans. It wasn't only in Russia, it was in other countries. So the society influenced an individual to make him implement his capabilities. Today we have a freedom of taking decisions. Once we have this freedom, we are more responsible for our brain. If you don't take care of your brain, it becomes to get addicted, it becomes to deteriorate. So, to say it briefly, happiness is when you can control your emotional state and can feel happy or feel good regardless of external factors around you, because you have shaped certain happiness dynamic stereotypes and dominance. And secondly, when you have found your goal in life, you have a business to deal with, you find a thing to do in your life, then this is happiness. When Einstein was dying, this is my favorite philosopher, He had a very hard life. A lot of difficult things happened in his life. He asked his doctor to say to his friends, tell him, I have lived a happy life, so I want you to be able to say this to yourselves. Andrei, thank you so much.
Уважаемые участники и гости форума, Андрей Курпатов, ваши аплодисменты! Дорогие друзья, я хочу напомнить, что у Андрея Владимировича будет участие еще в одной дискуссии, которая состоится в 6 часов в зале «Дон». Вы также сможете принять в ней участие, возможно, подойти, подписать книги, если у вас есть такое желание. А сейчас я хотел бы анонсировать программу, которая еще предстоит сегодня. В одно и то же время у нас проходит параллельно много интересных мероприятий. Например, в зале «Амур» пройдет дискуссия, посвященная будущему медицины. Ее тема — персонализированная медицина и механизмы прогностической медицины. В зале «Волга» обсудят непрерывное образование как новую реальность. В дискуссии принимают участие Вернер Маух, руководитель программы обучения взрослых Института непрерывного образования ЮНЕСКО. В зале «Печора» обсуждают тему волонтерства. Скрытый потенциал, как из волонтера вырастить социального предпринимателя. Так звучит тема дискуссии. В зале «Енисей» выступит директор QASE Urban Studio, основатель Центра развития архитектуры города Эйндховена. Эйндховен, город на юге Нидерландов, после закрытия заводов компании Philips, погрузился в депрессию и за следующие 20 лет прошел путь от самого ужасного города до столицы инноваций, образования и дизайна. Крупнейшего экономического центра макрорегиона, заметного на карте всей Европы и мира. Об этом опыте расскажет голландский эксперт. Ну а в нашем зале, зале «Москва», выступит еще один иностранный эксперт – Дэн Паллота, предприниматель, автор бестселлера и нового манифеста некоммерческого сектора под названием «Неблаготворительность». Он расскажет о том, какие вызовы стоят перед благотворительной сферой, какие новые формы и подходы позволят некоммерческим организациям развиваться и быть эффективными. Ждем вас здесь, в зале «Москва» в 18:00. Те, кто собирается покинуть зал, я напоминаю, что следует сдать устройство синхронного перевода, а также хочу сказать о том, что следующая лекция пройдет на английском языке, так что те, кто планирует посетить ее, вы можете воспользоваться этими устройствами, получить их, опять же, на входе в зал «Москва». Спасибо большое, ждем вас ровно в 18:00.